Hello again and welcome back to the Harvest Manager Configuration series. For this chapter, we will be picking up where we left off in our discussions on the harvest use case behavior configurations. So I mentioned something about validations and how we can use this to improve the use case definitions that we have. So there are times when a harvest use case need to perform some validations as part of the logic of said use case. For example, when we're harvesting not fixed germplasm via bulk harvest method, we typically want to check if the germplasm already has been harvested before. If it has been harvested, then there exists a bulk germplasm in the database, and the use case will just use that existing germplasm if it exists, instead of creating a new one. By defining such validations in an entity's validation property, we can instruct Harvest Manager to check any data that must be checked before proceeding with the creation or updating of any records as defined in the use case behavior configurations. So, the structure of the validation property is as follows. It has two sub-properties. The first one is called data required. Here we define the data fields or information that we will be using during the decision making. And then the next sub-property is the decisions, which is the definition of the condition statements as well as the decisions that we will be applying or following when those conditions are met. So we'll take a look at each of these sub-properties and learn how do we populate these properties. So for data required, this property is a JSON array, and each JSON object is a representation of a data field. And this is built again in a similar way as the data items that we've seen so far. And there's just an additional property called the reference name that must be defined for data items in the data required sub-property of validations. This reference name will be later used in the decisions JSON object for the conditions. And any data that we define in the data required will also be added to a data bucket that is named retrieved. So it should be accessible to subsequent entities that will be created in a given harvest use case. So this is an example here. We have a reference name. We're calling it the planted germplasm DBID. If, for example, we want to use this in some definition or in some condition. So we specify the type as data bucket. So again, we've seen the data bucket multiple times by this point. We specify the bucket name, planted, and then the field name, germplasm. So germplasm DBID. So whatever the value here is will be labeled as planted germplasm DBID. And then later on, we can use that in the decisions property when we're writing down conditions and making decisions during the harvest use case. So now for the decisions property, it's a JSON object which consists of what we call decision groups. So decision groups, they have keys that are actually names of that decision group. So this can provide us context as to what the decision group is about. And the key here is usually starts with a integer and then followed by a underscore and then the context. So we add this integer here because sometimes there are decisions that must be done, or decision groups that are done sequentially, wherein one decision group must be checked first or must be analyzed first before moving on to the next. So it's important that we number our decision groups when we're adding the names and the context of each decision group. So just keep that in mind when you're writing decisions. And then the value of each decision group is an array, and then each of those is an individual condition and decision. So as we can see here, we have a condition which is actually a string, And this is basically a logical statement. Like, for example, we're checking here in this sample if the planted germplasm DB ID is not null. And then if it's not null, then we define a decision for it. For example, we can set a flag to create a new record if this condition is met. So for an in-depth view on the validations, you can also check our Confluence documentation. So this is a complete guide on how you can make the most out of the validations in the harvest use case behavior configurations. Alright, so back to our presentation. So that's how we write the decisions and the data required objects. So let's go back to our example. In the use case that we previously defined, we can run into some potential issues without providing any validations. So in this use case, when harvesting not fixed germplasm via bulk harvest method, we create a new germplasm in the designation name pattern, with the designation name pattern rather. So the planted germplasm designation -b. There's no problem if a germplasm, say this germplasm name, CMSS21B00001S, which has germplasm state equal to not fixed, was harvested via bulk harvest method for the first time. So it will produce this germplasm name based on the pattern. So CMSS21B00001S-B. However, if, for example, we take this germplasm again and let's say we planted it in the next season or in the next year, and then we harvest it again using the same harvest method, which is bulk, that in our current definition, it will attempt to create another germplasm with the same designation. So let's try and see what actually happens in this case. So I have here, so here this is our original occurrence where we harvested this germplasm and it resulted in this germplasm. So -b, again, the original one is CMSS 21B001 00001S, and it resulted in this new germplasm which took the original germplasm designation and appended it with -b. So now I have a duplicate. Here is another occurrence, and I basically have the same germplasm planted here. So I also have CMSS 21B00001S, and I'm trying to harvest it again using the bulk harvest method. So let's see what happens when I try to harvest this when I've already harvested it in another occurrence. So I'll click on create and proceed. And the expected result here is that it will fail. So let's go again to the harvest data tab and check why it failed. So looking at the harvest summary, we can see that there's actually an API error here. And this API error is caused by the duplicate designation. So it attempted to create another germplasm, a new germplasm with this name, but as which is CMSS 21 B00001S-B. But as we've seen, this already exists. So how do we fix this error? How do we instruct Harvest Manager to use the existing germplasm when we are creating when we are harvesting this same germplasm again in potentially another season or another year? So let's go back to our presentation, and the way to avoid this issue is that we can add a validation that checks if the germplasm name for the bulk germplasm already exists as a germplasm record or germplasm name record in the database. And if it exists, then we just reuse that germplasm. If it doesn't, then we create a new germplasm. So the way to do this is to do the following validation. So as we recall, in our data for the germplasm entity, we did build a new designation using the name builder, which resulted in this pattern. So again, as we've seen, we have the original germplasm with -b at the end. So for our validation in data required, we can use API retrieval to actually perform germplasm name search. And for this, we will use the parameter for name value as the designation that we just built. So another bucket that will be very useful for us is a bucket that is called build data. So this bucket actually pertains to data that was built within the same entity. So for example, we have the data here and then the designation, and then I can refer to the designation here inside of the data required by referring to the build data bucket name and providing the field name, in this case designation. So whatever name was built here, we can use that as parameter in the germplasm name search to look for any existing germplasm with the same name. And then we're just going to take the germplasm ID, and the reference name is existing germplasm dbid. So if the expectation here is that if we find a existing non-voided germplasm with the same name, then we should use the existing germplasm. But if not, then we will create a new one. So the important thing to note here is the reference name, existing germplasm dbid. So that's the only data that we actually have in the data required property for validation in this case. In the decisions, we create a new decision group called create germplasm. So we have the numbering again, and then we have two condition groups actually, or decision groups here. The first one, the condition is set to existing germplasm dbid is null. So what this tells us is if the existing germplasm dbid is null, then it will set the flag to create the new record or the new germplasm to true. So in this case, if this is triggered, then a new germplasm will be created because the existing germplasm dbid was found to be null, indicating that the germplasm does not exist yet with the bulk germplasm name. However, if this is not satisfied, it will go to the next condition, and here the next condition is existing germplasm dbid is not null. So in this case, it says that okay, I found, or the harvest manager found a germplasm record with the same name, which is already existing. So in this case, we have a decision to use the existing germplasm. So we set it in the flags, use existing equal to true, and then under options, we also provide the identifier, which is the existing germplasm dbid. So now what will happen is that instead of creating a new germplasm, it will retrieve the existing germplasm dbid and put that in place of the new germplasm. So this existing ID will then be used by the germplasm name and the seed record when we are creating them. So that's how we can improve on this harvest use case. So now let's try to update our configuration. So I have here an updated version of the configurations. So I'll just I'll take this. Sorry, I just need to update something here. Okay, so type. All right, so I'll just take this configuration value, and again I'm going to update the harvest use case definition configuration. So I'll delete this first, the previous values. I'll put it here, and then again I had to cut it into two because it's too long. But yeah, we can just input it there. And now I'll try to update it again, and it's successful. So now the validation that we created is applied for the germplasm. So if we retry the duplicate harvest in our repeat experiment or occurrence, this should now not result in an error. So I'll just revert this failed harvest here. And after that, I can retry the harvest with the updated use case configuration. So I'll click on create and proceed. And this time around, you should see that the creation is now successful. So let's check the result. So a good way to compare is to in the original germplasm, or original occurrence rather. Let's take a look at the resulting germplasm, and then let's also take a look at the resulting germplasm in the duplicate occurrence. So in the original occurrence, we can see the germplasm code is it ends in 1847, and to verify that the same germplasm was used, we can also check the germplasm code. And we can see in the duplicate occurrence, the same germplasm code was used. So this indicates that Harvest Manager was able to correctly identify the existing bulk germplasm with the same name, and it used that as the germplasm for the new seed and package, instead of creating a new germplasm. So we can verify this even further by viewing the more information on the germplasm. And under the seeds tab, we can see the two seeds that were created in different experiments. So we have the original experiment and the repeat experiment. And that indicates that the validation that we applied was successful. So let's go back to our presentation. And with that, well, so more on validations. You can check the official documentation for more validation knowledge, so that you can take advantage of this validation property to really ensure that your harvest use cases are well defined and will not result in any errors that could potentially delay the harvest process. And with that, I want to congratulate you, because you've just learned how to implement a new harvest use case via database configurations. By using the concepts that you've learned so far in this series, and by referring to the official documentations for the configurations, you may now begin implementing even more use cases on your own. But should you have any questions about the configurations, please feel free to reach out to the core breeding development team and ask us your questions, so that we can help you as you implement your use cases. So again, thank you for tuning in to the series. We hope you found our topics to be informative, and we look forward to your feedback or questions, and we are happy to help you with the use cases that you will be implementing. And thanks, and have a great day.